Hi, morning. Welcome, everybody. This morning, we are flying into a state of the flow state. So we're going to find out how you get into that state of flow and which way you flow when you're there. So could be an interesting discussion. I know Trevor just meanders, he doesn't flow, but that's one of those things we've got to deal with in these wisdom chat sessions. So, yeah. So flow state, to be so, you're the research guy on this panel, and now you've usurped Ed from his position. So he's got to flow off and find something else to do. And we better get across to you first and see what you know about the flow state. See if you can kick us off in the right direction.
All right. Earlier in the year, actually, Pixar released a movie called Soul, an incredible movie that addresses topics such as consciousness, and of course, the flow state. Joe Gardner is a substitute music teacher at this high school, and he gets the opportunity of a lifetime to perform for one of his favorite, band, and Dorothea Williams, and it's a great opportunity. But first, he needs to audition. He goes to the audition and he completely kills the audition. It is so great. And the band is a jazz improv group. So it's all about jazzing. It's about being spontaneous. Now, what we see from his, audition is that when he plays the piano, he goes into this flow state, this state where everything just disappears, and we actually see that, in the movie because, um, his fingers actually take control of him, when on the piano. He doesn't do it consciously, and as he's playing the piano and the fingers are doing all the talking, he closes his eyes, and then everything suddenly drops, He's in a world of his own, and he's playing the piano and he plays one of, I think, the greatest solos ever, It is so great and he blows everyone in the room, wow, Dorothea Williams is so impressed, and he gets the job straight. Um, the movie says that, when you're in a state of flow, that's where you end between the physical realm and, the spiritual realm, so you are not in control in a sense, because something bigger than a demon, let me use a demon, a creative demon is actually inside of you, and it actually possesses you and you get super creative. Okay, maybe a demon was actually wrong example. Let me rather say God. I think that when you are in a state of flow, God is more in control, because you don't think, things just happen, But when you have this mastery in your craft, and if you practice your craft, you can get to a state of flow much quicker because, the neural pathways are already formed and everything is just automatic. Um, Flow is just being in a world where you're alone. You're alone. Let me rather say that. When you are in flow, alone, everything disappears and time is not even a factor. Nothing matters except for the job that you are currently doing. So when you are in flow, um, you are life. You are the universe. You are awareness. And you actually see yourself doing all these great things, um, God reigns, um, something is actually bigger than you. Um, I talk about, Hui, um, which is a state of non-doing, and I actually get that from Taoism. I think that when you are in flow, when Hui is active, because you are free and everything just goes on, you're not consciously trying to get to a job or to do something. Everything is just in free flow, you know. You are just alive and everything just flows, you know. So I think I'll just leave it there for today's topic, you know. Thank you, Ivan.
Thanks, Teresa. Good, good. Right. Ed, do you get into a flow state when you're running for days on end?
Yeah, I found it really difficult to get into this subject because when I thought about flow state, I then thought about the flow country, which is a large area of blanket bog in Scotland. And as you know, I spent a lot of time up there and I love it. And it's one of the few wilderness places you can go to easily. So I then had to still my mind a bit. And then I thought about a character called Flo, who was in a cartoon called Andy Capp. And of course, if you know Andy Capp, he was like a working class guy that never did any work. He was a master at flow, you know, he kind of just flowed through life without doing anything. And I thought, well, no, I really must settle down. So I watched the Stephen Kotler link that you gave us last time. And I thought it was interesting in that the guy very quickly establishes his credentials. He tells us he's a journalist, and then he tells us he lies. So I thought that was a really interesting way to establish your credentials. And then he talked about flow state and how it's in every sport, in every aspect of life. And he described the runner's high as being flow state. And I think he's wrong in that. But it could be that we're using the same word to talk about two different experiences. My first runner's high, I still remember. It was in 1995 in the Hastings Half Marathon. And you climb this big hill near the start, then you undulate a bit, and then you drop down to the seafront. And dropping down to the seafront, I was suddenly awash with this big endorphin rush. I was like on cloud nine. I was running 3 foot off the ground. I was just fantastic, but it was quite transient. I mean, it was very powerful and it was a high, but it was quite transient. And then when I got to the bottom of the hill, turned the corner onto the prom, and you faced about 3 or 4K into the wind, I was no longer high. But I think you do get in a flow state in running. It's not a high, it's a flow state. It's when you really feel at one with your body, you feel at one with the environment, you're aware of your breathing, you're aware of your movement, and you can run forever. It's not easy, but you can run forever. You know, when you get to the hill, your breathing labors, your heart rate goes up, your legs ache, but it's okay because that's how it's supposed to be. And then when we reach the top of the hill, again, you can feel your breathing sort of calm down. You can feel your heart rate dropping. You can feel your legs being nice and relaxed. And you can go on forever and ever and ever. And I always get in trouble when I'm in a flow state because I do go on forever. And then suddenly the wheels come off and I'm a lot of Ks from home. And I've got to turn around and grind it out to get home. And that's one way of getting in a flow state. And I think there it's just, and as Teresa says, you know, you're totally absorbed. You just, there's only you. Yeah, and you're at one with the environment. And the same thing happens with when I'm driving. I used to drive an awful lot. And I used to commute daily, a long commute. I used to drive in London. Used to get stressed out and it wasn't really very good for me. And then I kind of had a complete mindset change. I took a defensive driving course. And my mindset change was there weren't any idiots on the road. There was just me. I had to be in control of what's going on. And when I'm driving, I am totally concentrated. You know, I don't do any of that talk, like you see on the movies, people talking for about 2 or 3 minutes to the person next to them with their head turned. I always look at the road. I know what's going on in front of me. I know what's going on behind me. I know what's going on around me. And when I get it totally right, I am totally in the flow and I am at one with everything around me. And it saved my life a few times, because when you travel, I don't know what it is I used to do about 45,000 miles a year. I don't know what that is in kilometers, but it's a lot of kilometers. And of course, you're going to meet a problem, because there are people on the road that aren't that good at driving. And it saved my life a few times. But the other and that was a flow state from concentrating and actually really concentrating. And I think because it's an artificial situation, running's not an artificial situation, but driving a car is an artificial situation for the human animal. And the complete reverse to that was a few years ago, a local climber told me about this place where you can climb down the cliffs, and then at really low tide, there's this jumble of rocks which are dry enough to run on if you wait until the right moment and the sun's dried them off. And there's about 3 or 4K of rocks, big jumbled up boulders, and you can run across them. And they're all, different heights. So sometimes you're going up, sometimes you're going down, sometimes you jink to the left, jink to the right. Sometimes they're big steps, sometimes they're small steps. Occasionally you come across the one that's a bit unstable. And the only way to run that is to turn your mind off and not concentrate. And if you think about it, if you look at a dog running, they don't think about their running. They just run. Any animal that runs doesn't think about what it's doing, yet it doesn't trip up. It doesn't fall over. So I think there are two types of flow state. One where you really have to concentrate and engage your mind and really work at being in that moment. And the other one is where you have to turn your mind off and let your natural instincts take over. And that's certainly what happens when you run along those rocks. And it is the most wonderful feeling when you can do that, just to flow over that rocky surface, because you've turned your mind off and you've let your natural abilities fly. But I like both types of flow state, the concentrating one and the not concentrating one. So those are my thoughts on it.
Great, thanks, Ed. So, Jasper, were you concentrating or were you not concentrating? He wasn't concentrating because
I was in a flow state. So, yeah, no, I think it's interesting and undeniable that these states are there, and I had a little bit of that when, I think with Ed running daily, you obviously have more of those states than someone like myself who had only did it a few times in my life. But it was certainly there in running, that instant that he talks about, that you feel, man, now I can go like this forever, just for you to crash a little bit later. And then it's, like you said, then you're far from home and far from the next point. I could, I haven't seen the movie, but, I can imagine that artist where everything is just coming together and he's in a space of, it doesn't matter what's going on around him, but, he's just in that space. And I think he's correct. It is it's almost simultaneously a physical and a spiritual moment. So I've just made a few notes here to say, all right, flow happens when things align, and what needs to align? Circumstances. So let's say from a business perspective, where there's now a real awareness of difficult economic circumstances with a very identifiable need that's prevalent, and the need is not being filled by current solutions, then having new solutions, have structures in place, and have skilled people to execute. So, I was handling this from a business perspective. But however you look at it, I think it's when things align. So the bottom line for flow is there must be preparation. So that artist in that story of Tabiso could not have he won the day if he wasn't also a skilled artist that practice hours and hours and hours, and then just on the day it clicked. So whether you're a writer or an author or a speaker or a business person or whatever it is, it doesn't take away the hours and hours of preparation. And even to get into the flow of running that Edward talks about, it doesn't happen when you just leave home, and it doesn't happen in the first 10 kilometers. You know, it's almost when you reach that point of exhaustion where with your own strength, you can't do it anymore, then that flow kicks in. So wouldn't it be great if one could just somehow harness this whole element of flow and just turn it on like almost a pill or a bottle of medicine that you can just take and stay in that flow continuously, and use it, because one is extremely productive in flow. So I think that could be another topic, is how do you almost harness it, and how do you create and almost manage the alignment so that flow is almost the new norm instead of this haphazard stop-start. And then I think ultimately with flow comes favor. So I obviously would like to have favor in my life in terms of finding the right people in the right places, solving problems and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's my take on flow.
Thanks as well. All right, yeah. It's what fascinates me about the work that Kotler and Wheel are doing in terms of the Flow Genome project, which I've popped in there. It's about doing exactly what you were saying there. You know, how do we switch it on and switch it on when we want it? I don't think anybody wants to switch it off, but maybe they do. What about you, Lee? What do you think about flow?
Well, I was really glad to have watched the video clip that you sent, Ivan, because you realize that the research into flow has just grown exponentially. You know, we used to talk about being in the zone. I remember 20 years ago, that was the thing. That was what, and there were certain things that people could point to that would say this is optimal to get into the zone, but actually you realize now that it had very little evidence, had very little to go on. And what he's now talking about in terms of these 4 areas of psychology, where you've now don't have just information from a small database, you've got the world, because everybody can send in their information. So you've got big data from a psychological point of view. You've got, what did he mention? Psychology, the human biology, bioscience, pharmacology, understanding how chemicals work in our bodies, and technology. And all of those growing exponentially. And then we also have a lot more people getting into the flow zone, into the flow state, that you can also now understand how it works. So the fact that the flow state now is actually pretty well documented, what it takes from beginning to end to get into the flow state. And Jasper, the reality is there is a pill for that, because human beings, being who they are, we want all the results without the work. That's my take on it. And if I don't have to go, so Stephen Kotler talks about the fact that you can now do a 6-week training course where you just do an hour a day homework, and you can build the flow state into your way of being. So even that is a very concentrated, concertinaed process to get into the flow state. Unlike, you know, the 10,000 hours that Tabisa's talking about, or Edward's talking about, you know, miles and miles under your feet to get to that flow state. That you can do this course and get these results. Now you can even sidetrack that, take a pill, or put a chip in your brain. So definitely is. This is where our world is going. So, and because Stephen, even in that video, he talks about the fact that his organization, for example, is doing huge work with big organizations who are insisting that their management team use the flow state, at least their management team. They might be their whole organization. And that what you're doing is you're compounding performance upon performance upon performance. And of course, those who are not doing that, the divide is getting greater and greater. So it's just interesting where our world is going in terms of what is available to increase performance versus those, the haves and the have-nots, which is what we have discussed before. But it certainly did pique my interest, though, in saying, you know, we talk about working smarter versus harder, and I really am the artist when it comes to working hard. I've perfected that. I'm pretty good at working hard. And it would be nice if I worked a little bit smarter and used some of the things that are available in science to perhaps work a little bit smarter. So that's my take.
Thanks, Lee. Pop a pull. Press the right button, unmute yourself when you start talking. It always helps. So, Trevor, what's your pull of choice? Looks like it's LSD, or is it 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, well, clearly I'm also an artist, but I'm the opposite side of the spectrum to Lee. The quickest, simplest way to get to the top has got to be the 1, 2, 3 way. And I also watched that Stephen Kotler video, and I was quite impressed to hear him say that things only began developing around 1997. Well, you know, both Thabiso and Lee weren't born then, but for the rest of us who were around long before that, as I was going through that video, I thought the things he was talking about were things we were doing intuitively. So, you know, as we were, I think some of us were at the cutting edge and pioneering edge. You know, I wasn't too far behind the pioneers in the Doozy canoe marathon who went down the Doozy first. It was only 20 years ahead of me, 1954, the year I was born. And then 20 years later, I was on that Doozy with only a couple of hundred people. Same with Comrades. Also only a couple of hundred people, I think about 900, 1,000 at most in my first Comrades. But it had me thinking, you know, he was talking about all these new discoveries that they've made and into the biosciences. Do you remember in the old days talking of biorhythms? And they tended to actually poo-poo that. And it was almost in a sort of flow chart, if you think about biorhythms. And people would turn around and say, hey, there's certain times of the day that I really feel good. And that was quite interesting to me. Is there a link to those original days? I think it was poo-pooed as a concept, these biorhythms concepts. All I know that when I got up early, and this might interest a few people. Let me see if I can get the share screen up. Talking about flow states, and it brought back to me, where did I, going backwards into my younger days, where did I really experience extreme flow? And Ed, I must tell you, when you talk of flow in running, it's a load of codswallop. The only flow I got were tears that flowed down after about 60 to 70 Ks and wondering why the hell I was on this road. The tears were flowing big time. I never hit a flow state there in 10 years of doing the Comrades. But here is where I really got into a flow state. And that was very much in the surf. And I remember I did this today. It was based on something we're doing on a masterclass. And I remember showing you guys, my mate and I, in the biggest floodwater flow on the Doozy. But I don't think I've ever spoken to you about every morning and why I was out early in the surf. Really, I was at the pioneering side of wave skiing in the country. I can remember Gordy Rowe, who was, in fact, he was one of the first ever Doozy canoeists. I think he was in those first groupings. He developed a business called the Kayak Center, and he developed a wave ski craft. Now, in the early 70s, people were not into wave skiing. And he knew that I was into doing Eskimo rolls and all those sort of things in a canoe. And he had this new concept of a wave ski. And he asked, listen, would I go and test it? And he put a belt on this basically a surfboard, but it came out of a mold that he had produced. And he called it the Fat Cat. And he put a belt on it. And he asked me to take it out. Well, it was the most glorious thing I ever experienced. And I was watching a video yesterday of people actually wave skiing in around 2018. And I found this image. And it was a pity back in those days, we really didn't have cameras around as we do today, that we could have caught some of what we were doing in those pioneering days. But that was, for me, really being in the flow. And we would spend hours, and I don't think I've ever shown that. So I thought some of you might see what I might have looked like in my younger days, spending a huge amount of time in the surf. I often ended up on the rocks, but that was because we were crazy. In those particular days, out at Battery and the Snake Park and off North Beach, when we were doing these things. So in the flow state, I'll stop that share. And Stephen Kotler, a little bit more about him. I just thought we were doing these things intuitively. And as I think about wisdoms and its development and the group of people that are coming in, and I trace back to my early days of really getting over business and getting into the flow state when I first took on this Academy of Learning in the late, when was it, 80s. I remember coming up here without my wife. She was down in Durban for 90 days, wrapping up the sale of our home in Durban. And I spent 90 days in the office of this new business and completely reconstructed it. And in those 90 days of just being totally focused, no one around, I was in complete flow state. And as a result of that, within 18 months, we had grown that operation to over 80,000 students strong. But that's what happens when you have just 1,000% focus into something. So I was clearly in flow state then. And now what do I think about flow state? As this guy Kotler was talking about 10,000 hours being reduced to half that amount, I think he's got it wrong. I think you can get into flow state within minutes. And all you have to do is, as I've always said, have a look at the top performers in their game and try and identify what their top 1, 2, 3 things are that they do consistently, and then replicate that. And you can do it like that. That's my belief. So I think he's got it wrong. It's not just half the time to get there to 10,000 hours. I think you can get there very quickly, but you have to have the right expertise. Lee mentioned 4 different things: bioskills, technology, all of those sort of things. I often get frustrated because I can't use this latest current technology that I believe youngsters can use to actually get into winning state very quickly. And it sometimes frustrates me that it takes days, weeks, months to do things when we've got to do actually today, you got to do things in a couple of days. Otherwise, the competition has beaten you. And then as Lee was talking about this guy, Kotler, and that everyone can hit these superhuman states, it just struck me, well, if everyone can get there, where is this sort of pyramid of the rare few who always become the super achievers? Does the whole world become super achievers and we can solve all the problems and there's no one that's going to be poor and all those sort of things? Or do we become a super sophisticated triangle of hugely intelligent, capable people, and the Elon Musks of this world today are at the bottom of that pyramid, and the Ed Chapmans and Trevor Nells of this world at the top of that pyramid? Is this world going to be inverted? Can you imagine being a poor Elon Musk at the bottom of the pyramid in the next 10 to 20 years in terms of the exponential growth of development that Kotler is talking about? It's confused.
Yeah, I'm confused. Yeah, well, Trevor definitely got into the flow state there, didn't he? I mean, he was flowing full on. But anyway, yeah, for me, it is fascinating. I certainly don't think Kotler suggests that everyone can do it. I think he says everyone has the potential to do it. It's a big difference. A very big difference. So lots of people would like to get there. They'd like to take the shortcuts, you know, the magic mushrooms and the LSDs of this world and a few others. There is a specific drug, I can't remember the name, that he actually mentions in some of his work. But you know, those shortcuts are like most shortcuts. They're transient. They often wind you up in the wrong place completely, and you know, you battle to get back there without doing more and more of the wrong things. And I think that's the real challenge with looking at those shortcuts. And I have to disagree with you, Trevor. I think you can get into a flow state like this 1, 2, 3 because of all the experience and the knowledge and the practice, which is probably well in excess of 10,000 hours. So to get into those kinds of states instantly means that there's been a lot of preparation and a lot of work that's gone in there, you know. And there are instances, and I mean, Kotler has examples of that in his own life. When he was a relatively young man, he contracted Lyme's disease, I think it was, and was basically bedridden. I mean, he had to stop work. He could get out of bed for maybe an hour or two a day. He was just spiraling downwards into you know, an inevitable sort of end, as it were. And the one day a friend of his came to his house and said to him, "Stephen, you got to get out of bed. We're going surfing." So there you go, Trev. Surfing comes back into it. And Kotler said to him, "You're mad. You know, I can hardly get out of bed. I mean, you know, now you want me to go surfing?" So I said, "Come, we're going." Took him down to the beach, sat him on a surfboard in the baby waves, and you know, it started from there, and that's where this whole thing sort of came, and just the engagement of his you know, his internal systems and things like that, and getting into that kind of state energized his body's natural pharmacological capabilities, and actually wound up basically curing him. So over time, he went back into the surf until he could get up and stand up on the board and do some surfing and so on. And I mean, if you've watched the videos, you've seen him now. I don't think he's the healthiest guy around, because I think he smokes like a chimney, which is really quite weird. But you know, clearly he managed to deal with that. And you hear these stories. I mean, Trevor, you posted a video on one of the chat groups a little while back about that guy who was in that accident and became a quadriplegic. And you know, during his TED talk, he actually stands up out of his wheelchair. And you know, people can do that. The body can do that. And I think it's about tapping into those into those hidden abilities that our systems actually have, that modern society, and Lee, you touched on it, you know, the silver bullet or the magic pill mentality, you know, just disregards completely, because people are looking for those microwave answers. Let's push a button and dinner's ready in 30 seconds. And yeah, that's all transient. It really is. And I posted a couple of links earlier. A thing I picked up yesterday called the Superhuman Experience, and I've just started watching some of the trailers of that. Absolutely fascinating. I mean, there's a guy in India, I think it is, who's through various techniques has enabled himself to generate electricity so powerful that it can actually shock a person to death. So when he demonstrates it, he actually picks a leaf or a flower from a plant, and he'll touch you, and you can actually see in the dark, you can see the sparks, and the person actually reacting to the jolt of electricity that he generates. And that's just one of the things that they demonstrate in that particular series. And I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal what humans are capable of. And I think getting into that state does take extreme training. I mean, one of the main reasons why the Navy SEALs contract people like Kotler and Wheel, and because they've got to get into those states when they're in extremely dangerous situations. You've got to know that, and that's as a team. It's not even as an individual. And I think that getting into a flow state as part of a team is something that I find really, really interesting. One of the examples he quotes as well, and I forget the name of the movie, but there were guys who, these guys who fly these wingsuits at extreme speeds without any security. They did this scene for a movie where I think there was a team of, I think it was 4 of them that actually flew in between the high rises in a city. And I mean, there were things that had never been done before, and were extremely dangerous. And there's no safety net, absolutely no safety net at all. And the way that these guys trained for that particular section in that movie, I mean, it was a full-on genuine stunt. There was no CGI, there was no animation, there was absolutely nothing. It was real. And these guys said, you have no time to think. All you can do is watch the feet of the guy in front of you, and you've got to let the flow state take over, because if you try and anticipate consciously what is going to happen, you're going to crash. You're going to wind up flying headfirst into a building. And that's the way these guys did this thing. I mean, absolutely mind-blowing stuff. And as I said, the other example, as I say, is the Navy SEALs, where you're going into, a dangerous situation, unknown territory, often in the dark. You've got to know that the guys around you, you've got to know where they are, even though you can't see them. You've got to know what they're going to do, even though you can't see what they're engaging with. And you've got to know how you're going to react in those situations, even though you don't know what the situation is. And all of that becomes part of being. And I mean, Jasper spoke about it, getting that perfect team around you, is part of where it all goes. So for me, it's an absolutely fascinating topic, as you can hear. But anyway, we have been in the flow, and we have flowed well past the bottom of the hour. So I think we'll call a halt on it there and see if we've got a topic for tomorrow.
We do have a topic for tomorrow, because we are starting our program of Wisdom's Chats this week, where on Tuesdays we're focusing on personal mastery, and on Thursdays on business fundamentals. So Wednesday will flow out of Tuesday, and Friday will flow out of Thursday. But tomorrow's topic is, why do so many successful people say that attitude is so important? So what is it about attitude that is a quality of success? So let's talk about that tomorrow.
Let's talk about attitude. Great, fantastic. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, everyone. So flow off and have a good day. And by the way, join the big one, I think, at 1 p.m. I believe there's a great luminary who's leading that session in, if I'm not mistaken.
Not on the big one, Ivan. It's at 10 o'clock, the Cornwall one.
Ah, I thought you were on the big. Brock was advertising you as on the big one.
No, I'm on the Cornwall one at 10 o'clock.
10.
which
okay.
means I've got to get out and do my run pretty quickly. Otherwise, I won't get back
All right.
in time.
All right, we'll let you run off then. Good. Okay,
Yep.
thanks everyone. Have a great day further, and we'll see you soon. Cheers now.
Bye.